When the golden Maknae becomes a military chef, hidden recipes, secret memories, and untold emotions begin to simmer beneath the surface. The clang of metal echoed through the mess hall like a sudden burst of thunder. "Private John, the fire's too high," shouted Sergeant Min, but Jungkook didn't flinch. Flames danced dangerously in the pan before him, golden oil spitting under the dim fluorescent lights. His gloved hand moved fast, fluid, instinctive, like a musician lost in his rhythm. He tilted the pan, caught the flame in a swirl, and turned chaos into aroma. The smell of garlic, soy, and toasted sesame filled the air, quieting the murmurs around him. He wasn't supposed to be here, not cooking, not smiling. Yet here he was, apron tight, sweat dripping down his temple, creating beauty from ration supplies. The same hands that once held a microphone now held a ladle, and somehow it fit. "Permission to taste?" whispered Private Han, wide-eyed. Jungkook didn't answer, just handed him a spoon with quiet authority. One bite, and Han froze. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Then came a laugh, uncontrolled and genuine, echoing through the cold walls. "Hyung, this tastes like home." But Jungkook's smile faltered for a moment, a flicker too brief for anyone to notice. Home. The word cut through him like a blade. He hadn't heard his mother's voice in months. His last letter lay unfinished in his locker, stained by a drop of cooking oil. He'd meant to tell her he was fine, that cooking here made him feel grounded, that he was finding something new inside himself. But words always failed him when it came to what he really felt. That night, as the others slept, Jungkook stayed behind, cleaning the counters in silence. The kitchen had become his battlefield. He fought his memories here, the concerts, the flashing lights, the loneliness that came after every encore. The heat, the knives, the rhythm of the kitchen, they kept his thoughts sharp and his heart from breaking. "Private John," came a voice from the doorway. It was Sergeant Min again, softer this time. "Tomorrow, the officers want a special meal. You'll be in charge." Jungkook turned, his eyes catching the dim reflection of himself in the steel pot beside him. Sweat, determination, and a strange calm. "Understood, sir." When the door closed, he took a deep breath and reached for his notebook, a small, worn journal hidden behind the spice rack. Inside were recipes, half-formed and smudged with fingerprints. But each dish carried a memory. Kimchi stew from trainee days, sweet soy chicken from his first apartment, a rice porridge recipe his grandmother used to make when he was sick. These were his songs now, each dish a verse, each flavor a note of longing that he scribbled something new that night. Hope stew, he called it. Ingredients: scraps of beef, dried radish, seaweed, patience. He wrote in neat strokes, then stopped, remembering something his bandmate once said. "You always turn pain into art, Jungkook." Morning came with a sharp whistle. The unit assembled, exhausted and hungry. Jungkook moved like a machine, yet with the grace of an artist. Boiling broth, slicing radish, timing each step perfectly. The scent began to spread again, warming, nostalgic, impossible to ignore. Officers gathered before the meal was even served. When they finally tasted it, no one spoke. Not out of formality, but awe. Even Sergeant Min, who never praised anyone, gave a small nod. "This," he muttered, "isn't just food." But Jungkook's gaze was far away, beyond the steaming bowls and empty plates. He thought of the stage lights, the ocean of purple waving hands, the life that felt like a dream now sealed behind gates and uniforms. He wasn't the superstar here. He was just Private John, the cook who healed through taste. Yet deep down, he knew that what he was cooking wasn't just food for others. It was a recipe for survival. Every dish he made kept a part of Jungkook alive in this quiet, disciplined world. And as the night fell again, he wrote one more line beneath his new recipe. "Even in silence, flavor speaks." The rain began before dawn, tapping against the tin roof of the kitchen like impatient fingers. Jungkook stood by the small window, watching the drops race each other down the glass. Steam rose from the pot behind him, filling the air with the earthy scent of soy and ginger. The mess hall was empty, quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the low hiss of simmering broth. He liked this hour, the in-between time when the world hadn't yet woken, when even the soldiers outside moved softly. Here he could think. Or maybe, try not to. He stirred the pot absently, his mind far from the military base. In his head, melodies drifted in and out like ghosts. A half-finished song, something he had written years ago, kept replaying. But he couldn't remember the lyrics anymore, just the way it made him feel. Weightless, free, Private John. A voice broke through his thoughts. It was Corporal Lee, his superior in the kitchen. Short, square-shouldered, with eyes that saw everything. You've been up since 0400 again, haven't you? Yes, sir. Jungkook replied without turning. Lee sighed, stepping closer. You can't keep working like this. You'll burn out. Even soldiers need rest. Jungkook didn't respond. Instead, he ladled a small bowl of the broth and handed it over. Taste this, sir. Lee hesitated, then accepted. He took a sip, and his eyes widened. The flavor was deep, balanced, comforting, somehow. What is this? Something my grandmother used to make, Jungkook said quietly. She called it guk for the lost. Lee chuckled softly. And who's lost here, Private? Jungkook met his gaze, just for a moment. All of us, sir. For a brief second, the air shifted, something unspoken passing between them. Then the kitchen door slammed open. A young soldier burst in, panting. Report from command. There's a surprise inspection today. 0800 sharp. Lee swore under his breath. They'll want breakfast on the table before they arrive. Fast. The comm shattered. The kitchen exploded into motion, knives clattering, pans heating, orders flying. Jungkook moved like a shadow, his body following a rhythm no one else could hear. Crack, stir, flip, plate. Every movement precise. Every motion purposeful, but something fell off. The oil was too thin. The eggs too pale. His senses, usually sharp, were clouded. He was tired, more tired than he wanted to admit. And beneath that exhaustion, something darker pulsed, the quiet fear that he was losing himself here. When the officers arrived, the air thickened. Boots clicked, voices barked, and every soldier froze. The head inspector, a tall man with a cold stare, tasted the food in silence. His expression didn't change. Jungkook stood still, hands trembling slightly at his sides. Finally, the officer put down his spoon. Adequate, he said flatly. Then his eyes flicked to Jungkook. You made the stew? Yes, sir. The officer studied him for a moment, something unreadable flickering behind his gaze. You're the one they call the singer, aren't you? Jungkook hesitated. I was, sir. The officer smirked faintly. Now you're a cook. Life's funny that way. He turned away without another word. The tension dissolved as quickly as it came. Laughter and chatter returned, relief rippling through the unit. But Jungkook didn't join in. He stood there, staring at the table, the officer's words echoing in his mind. Now you're a cook. That night, Jungkook found himself sitting alone behind the barracks. The rain finally stopped, leaving the air cool and sharp. The smell of wet soil mingled with the faint trace of soap from the kitchen. In his hands, he held a folded piece of paper, one of the few letters he'd ever written but never sent. Dear Mom, it began. I've learned to cook for 50 men at once. I've learned that a smile can hide exhaustion, and that silence can taste like broth when you stir it long enough. He stopped reading. He couldn't finish it. The words felt too heavy, too real that a flashlight beam flickered nearby. Private John. It was Han, the youngest in the unit. The guys are asking if you'll make that sweet soy chicken again tomorrow. They said it tastes like something you'd eat with family. Jungkook smiled faintly, tucking the letter away. Yeah, tomorrow. As Han walked off, Jungkook looked up at the faint stars breaking through the clouds. He thought about the officer's words, about music, about kitchens and noise and silence. Maybe this was what he was meant to learn. Not fame, not perfection, but patience. Inside, the kitchen lights were still on, flickering softly. He could almost hear the sizzle of oil calling him back. The place where he lost himself, and somehow, kept finding pieces of who he was. The kitchen roared like a battlefield that morning. Metal striking metal, boiling pots hissing like angry steam engines, and shouted orders cutting through the heat. Jungkook's shirt clung to his back, soaked in sweat, his fingers moving faster than his thoughts. The unit was preparing for a visiting general, and perfection wasn't a request, it was survival. Private John. Where's the sauce? Shouted Corporal Lee, voice almost drowned by the clatter. Almost ready. Jungkook replied, stirring a pot so fiercely that droplets splashed across his wrist, burning. He didn't flinch. The sting grounded him, pulled him back into focus. Around him, chaos reigned. Too many men, too little space, everyone trying to prove something. The air was thick with tension, garlic, and fear. Then, amid the noise, came the smallest sound, water boiling over. Jungkook turned sharply, catching the pot just as it spilled across the counter. He cursed under his breath, grabbing a towel to clean it up, but the moment stopped him. The way the bubbles burst, rhythmic and wild, it reminded him of a beat, an unfinished melody he'd once built during a late-night studio session. For just a second, he could almost hear it again, faint and fragile beneath the chaos. Focus, John, barked Lee. We're not making music here. Jungkook blinked, forcing the memory away. but his hands trembled slightly as he chopped green onions. Quick, precise, but distant. He wondered if he'd ever get used to the silence after applause, the stillness after noise. Maybe this kitchen, with its rhythm and heat, was the closest thing to a stage he'd ever have again. As the team worked, Han rushed in with a box of supplies, tripping on the wet floor. The box hit the ground, scattering potatoes across the room. "I'm sorry, Hyung," he blurted out, eyes wide with panic. Everyone froze for a second. Jungkook glanced at Lee, expecting a scolding, but instead, he crouched down, picking up a potato. "No harm done," he muttered. "Hurry up. We're short on time." Relieved laughter rippled through the room. Even Jungkook smiled faintly as he helped gather the fallen vegetables. But something about the small moment stayed with him. The fragility of it, the human crack in all the discipline. Hours later, the food was served. Bowls of golden stew, neatly arranged side dishes, every plate gleaming with precision. The general ate in silence, his face unreadable. Then he set down his spoon, looking directly at Jungkook. "You made the bulgogi?" "Yes, sir," Jungkook answered. The general nodded slowly. "It reminds me of my mother's cooking." "You have good instincts, soldier." That single word, instincts, hit deeper than any applause had. He bowed slightly, keeping his expression neutral, but something inside him shifted. When the meal ended and the officers left, the team exhaled all at once. Some clapped Jungkook on the back. Han grinned from ear to ear. "You did it again, Hyung. You're like magic. Magic." He used to hear that word a lot, from fans, producers, friends. It used to mean something else entirely. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Jungkook stayed in the kitchen again. He stood over a pot of boiling water, just listening. The bubbles popped and hissed, steady and rhythmic. He found himself whispering lyrics to no one. Half words, fragments, memories turned into sound. Then he took out his notebook. Beneath the recipe for hope stew, he began to write another, harmony soup. Ingredients: seaweed, soy paste, silence, heartbeat, he wrote. He caught his reflection in the window. His hair cropped short, face leaner, eyes older. But beneath the fatigue, there was a quiet peace. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was creating again, in a different language, through different senses. The kitchen had become his studio, the soldiers his audience, and the steam his applause. He smiled faintly and stirred the pot once more, whispering to himself, "Every sound has a purpose, even boiling water." Outside, dawn began to break, painting the sky pale gold. The bass stirred awake, and Jungkook, the soldier, the artist, the chef, prepared for another day of noise and silence intertwined. The morning fog hung low over the training grounds, clinging to the soldiers' boots as they marched. From the kitchen window, Jungkook watched them move in perfect rhythm, an echo of the discipline that ruled their lives. He tightened the knot on his apron, took a breath, and turned back to his station. The air inside was warmer, alive with the scent of sesame oil and simmering broth. Yet beneath it all, something felt heavier today. There was a visitor coming, a military nutrition officer from headquarters, rumored to be strict and unforgiving. Corporal Lee had warned them all. One mistake, and the kitchen loses its privileges. Jungkook didn't fully understand what that meant, but the tension in Lee's voice told him enough. As the others prepped vegetables, Jungkook reached for a small tin box tucked inside the cupboard. It was old and dented, wrapped in a strip of cloth. Inside, he kept tiny packets of spices he'd saved: ginger, gochugaru, dried kelp. They weren't standard military supplies. They were memories. Each time he opened that box, the smell hit him like a song. The spices reminded him of Seoul nights, of laughter echoing in a small apartment, of the sound of a guitar strumming while something cooked slowly in the background. He touched one of the packets gently, almost reverently. "You still remember, right?" he whispered to himself. "Talking to your ingredients again?" Han's voice broke his reverie. The young soldier leaned against the counter, grinning. Jungkook smirked. "They listen better than people." Han laughed. "You're weird, Hyung." "I know," Jungkook said softly. "That's how the food turns out good." By noon, the officer arrived, a woman with sharp eyes and a clipboard in hand. Her presence shifted the air immediately. The kitchen fell silent. She observed everything with surgical precision: the placement of knives, the temperature of the broth, even the alignment of bowls. Nothing escaped her. "Private John," she said suddenly. "You're the one everyone talks about." The singer turned soldier. Jungkook stood straighter. "Yes, ma'am. Let's see if your cooking sings too." Her tone was cool, but not unkind. She handed him a list, simple dishes, but required to be perfect in taste and nutrition. One of them was seaweed soup, a traditional meal served for birthdays and recovery. Jungkook hesitated for a moment. He hadn't made that dish since before enlistment. He began cooking silently, each movement slow and deliberate. The seaweed soaked, the broth thickened, and the smell of home filled the room. Every detail pulled something out of him, a flicker of memory, a heartbeat of warmth. "Why did you choose that recipe?" the officer asked, watching him closely. "It's a memory," Jungkook replied. "I used to make it for someone I loved. It always made them smile." Her eyes softened slightly. "Then make it like you used to." He did. He stirred the pot with care, tasting as he went, adjusting the salt, the sesame, the timing. By the time he served it, the air in the kitchen was different, quiet, almost reverent. The officer took a sip. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she set down her spoon, exhaling slowly. "This tastes alive," she murmured. Simple, but full of feeling. Jungkook bowed slightly, unsure how to respond. As she left, she paused by the door. "Private John," she said, turning back. "Your food carries emotion. That's rare here. Don't lose it." When she was gone, Lee clapped Jungkook's shoulder. "You just saved this kitchen." But Jungkook wasn't smiling. Her words lingered. "Don't lose it." He didn't know if he still could. Each day in uniform blurred the person he once was. Each salute, each rule, chipped away at the boy who sang to the moon and cooked at dawn. That night, he sat outside behind the kitchen again, the sky wide and silent. Han joined him, carrying 2 cups of instant coffee. "Hyung, when you cook, it feels different," Han said quietly. "Like the food remembers something you've forgotten." Jungkook looked at the steaming cup in his hands. Maybe that's what cooking is. Trying to remember. The wind carried the faint smell of the soup from earlier, and for a fleeting second, Jungkook saw his old life flicker in front of him. The stage lights, the cheers, the quiet moments after a show when he'd cook alone just to feel normal again. That he closed his eyes, letting the memory pass through him like steam dissolving into the night. "Tomorrow," he said softly, more to himself than to Han, "I'll cook something new. Something that doesn't just remember, but forgives." And somewhere deep inside the base, a pot began to simmer again, slowly, steadily, carrying with it the sound of someone trying to find peace through flavor. The snow had come overnight, thin, quiet, and blinding in its purity. From the kitchen window, Jungkook watched it fall, layering the training field in white. The soldiers moved slower that morning, their breaths visible in the frozen air. Inside, the stoves burned bright, the only warmth in a world turned to ice. That he stirred the pot slowly, the steam rising like ghosts around him. Every sound felt louder in the cold, the clang of ladles, the scrape of knives, the muffled chatter of tired men. But inside Jungkook's head, there was only one sound, the low hum of a melody he couldn't let go. It had haunted him for days now, unfinished and wordless, looping endlessly as if begging him to remember. Corporal Lee entered, stamping snow from his boots. "Morning, John. You're early again." Jungkook smiled faintly. "The kitchen's quieter before dawn." Lee chuckled. "You and your quiet. Sometimes I think you like the noise of boiling water more than people." "Boiling water doesn't judge," Jungkook replied. Lee gave a half smile and handed him a clipboard. "New assignment. You're to prepare a meal for tomorrow's ceremony. The colonel's birthday. Big deal. The higher-ups will be here." Jungkook's eyes moved over the list. Dozens of ingredients, half of which weren't available. "We don't have half of this," he said. "I know," Lee replied. "That's why it's your problem." He left with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Jungkook stared at the paper for a long moment, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, he returned to the kitchen. The cold seeped through the cracks of the door, and his breath turned to mist. He lit the stove, its flame small and blue. On the counter lay what little he had: dried radish, rice, soy paste, a handful of garlic. Not much, but enough. It had to be. He began chopping slowly, deliberately, his burned hand aching beneath the bandage. Each slice echoed through the empty kitchen. The sound was sharp, rhythmic, almost musical. He realized it was the same tempo as the melody in his head, the one that wouldn't leave him alone. As he cooked, he began to hum under his breath. The notes wove through the steam, filling the silence with something fragile and human. For the first time since enlistment, he wasn't cooking to please anyone. He was cooking for the sound of it, for the way the knife hit the board, for the scent that rose with every stir, for the quiet rhythm of being alive. Still awake. Jungkook startled. It was Han, wrapped in a blanket, hair messy with sleep. He rubbed his eyes and smiled. I heard singing. Jungkook laughed softly. Old habits. Han came closer, watching him work. What are you making? I don't know yet, Jungkook said. Maybe something that tastes like forgiveness. Han tilted his head. Forgiveness for what? Jungkook didn't answer. He thought of the faces he'd left behind, the ones who had cheered for him, who had waited for him. He thought of the silence that followed his departure, and how he'd convinced himself he didn't miss it. But he did. Terribly. The soup began to boil, thick and fragrant. Jungkook tasted it, then handed Han a spoon. Han took a sip, his eyes widening. It's warm, he said simply. Like something you forgot you needed. Jungkook smiled faintly. Then it's right. When the ceremony came the next day, the dining hall was dressed in precision. Polished tables, lined uniforms, the heavy scent of cologne and starch. Jungkook's dish sat at the center, unassuming but alive with color. The colonel took a bite, paused, and then nodded slowly. What is this called? He asked. Jungkook hesitated. Gamyeomguk, sir. Memory soup. The colonel smiled faintly. Good name. It reminds me of something my mother made when I was a boy. Laughter rippled through the room. Compliments followed, but Jungkook heard none of them. His eyes were fixed on the pot at the end of the table, the one still half full, steam rising like faint whispers. Later, after everyone had gone, he returned to the kitchen once more. The silence after celebration felt heavier than ever. He sat down, staring at his hands. The burn healing, the skin rougher now. He thought about Lee's words. About Han's smile. About the way cooking had become both punishment and salvation. That he reached for his notebook again and wrote. The taste of memory is bittersweet. It lingers longer than hunger. Then, below it, a new recipe, silent stew. Ingredients, boiled dreams, a pinch of regret, one heartbeat, and a song that refuses to die. That he closed the notebook, placed it gently beside the stove, and whispered to the empty air, I'm still here. Still cooking. Still listening. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, burying the noise of the world in quiet white. The winter had begun to fade. The snow outside the barracks melted into thin rivers, tracing paths through the muddy ground. For the first time in months, sunlight broke through the gray clouds, spilling gold across the base like a quiet promise. In the kitchen, Jungkook stood before the stove one last time, his apron worn, his hands rough, his bandage gone. The familiar hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. It felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Tomorrow, his service would end. He looked around the kitchen, the scratched counter, the dented pots, the spice tins lined like soldiers at attention. Every mark, every burn, every scent carried a memory. This place had broken him down and rebuilt him differently. It had silenced the singer, but awakened the man. Han entered quietly, his face pale in the morning light. Hyung, he said softly. They said you're leaving tomorrow. Jungkook nodded. Yeah, it feels strange. Han hesitated, then held out a small, folded paper. We all wrote something for you. You should read it later. Jungkook took it with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Thank you, Han. Take care of the kitchen for me, okay? Han grinned. No one cooks like you, but I'll try. When he left, Jungkook opened his notebook one last time. The pages were worn thin, filled with recipes, stains, and scribbled fragments of lyrics. Every page told a story, the loneliness, the laughter, the ache of missing something he couldn't name. He flipped to the last blank sheet and wrote carefully, slowly, as though each letter mattered. Final recipe, home, ingredients, time, silence, a handful of forgiveness, and one heart that remembers where it belongs. That he paused, staring at the words, then closed the book. The smell of rice filled the air, soft, earthy, comforting. He had decided to cook one final meal for the unit, not out of duty, but gratitude. Something simple, rice, seaweed, and soup made from the last of his secret spices. He wanted them to taste not perfection, But warmth, the quiet, steady kind that stays long after the plate is emptied as the soldiers gathered for lunch. Laughter filled the hall. It wasn't the loud, chaotic sound of celebration, but something gentler, easier. They ate. They joked. They thanked him. Jungkook said little, only smiled. His chest felt heavy, but not in a painful way. Corporal Lee sat beside him, sipping the soup. You've changed this place, John. You taught us something we didn't know we were missing. Jungkook looked at him. And what's that? Lee smiled. Heart. When the meal was done and the dishes cleared, Jungkook stayed behind in the empty kitchen. He cleaned every counter, wiped every pot until it shone. Then he set his apron on the hook, right where it had always hung. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at it, at the quiet stillness that had once scared him but now felt like home. He turned off the lights and walked out into the fading afternoon. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the yard. Han was waiting by the gate, saluting with a grin. Jungkook returned the gesture, then shouldered his bag as he stepped beyond the gate. The sound of the kitchen lingered behind him. The soft hiss of boiling water, the echo of knives, the rhythm of life that had carried him through silence. For the first time in a long while, he felt ready to sing again. Not to an audience, not for applause, but for himself. That night, in a small room back in Seoul, he unpacked his things. At the bottom of his bag lay his old, stained notebook. He opened it and found, tucked between the pages, Han's note that it read. Hyung, your food made us remember who we were before the uniforms. Don't stop cooking. Don't stop feeling. Jungkook laughed quietly, the sound soft but full. He placed the notebook on the table, opened the window, and breathed in the city air, different now, but familiar. He went to the kitchen, lit the stove, and set a pot of water to boil. The same sound greeted him, gentle, steady, alive. He smiled. Let's cook again, he whispered. The flame danced, the water sang, and somewhere deep within him, the music returned, not from fame or memory, but from peace. And as the night deepened, the aroma of his final recipe filled the room, warm and real, the taste of home.